I want to start out by reading from the Gospel of Mark, a passage that I think helps me at least to think about what might be going on. They came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, "Do you see anything?" He looked up and said, "I see people. They look like trees walking around." Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Then his eyes were opened. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him home, saying, "Don't even go back to the village." There's something about not going back to the village. There's something about the fact that Jesus decided not to heal the man in the village, but took him outside and away from the thinking and the environment of the village. And then after he healed him, said, "Don't go back there." There's something about that. But in our church, as we say, things are fine the way they are. Are they fine the way they are? I start out by saying to you this, though, bringing you this message of Easter. I say to you, Alleluia, Christ is risen. Lord is risen. Alleluia. Amen. And so we are an Easter people. But certainly things are not fine the way that they are. I want to share some insights with you, some thoughts. I've never been accused of being profound. I'm really just a simple country boy from northwestern Pennsylvania who God saw fit to make a bishop for heaven knows what reason. But I want to share some thoughts with you this evening. If I had $1 for every person who, with a straight face, actually said to me, things are fine the way they are, we could probably plug the budget deficit of most congregations in the Episcopal Church. People are very serious when they think just around the corner is the right answer. If we just keep doing what we're doing for one more season, one more year, if we can just reinvent this one more time, if we can just do one more thing, maybe something will happen. Maybe it will change. If I don't, could it be that I could change this whole church? Could we change it without giving up anything that's important to us right now? That would be great. What I want to begin with talking to you about this evening is thinking about organizations, thinking about the church in some particular ways. An organizational scholar by the name of Peter Senge said, "There's nothing is more limiting to a group than the inability to talk about the truth." Sometimes I think we're afraid to get to the truth. Or we think we have a corner on it, but we're not sure what to do with it. But in any case, it's good for us to begin to have conversations by talking about where we are and seeing that the patterns in which we're engaged are leading us to a cliff. They aren't leading us to a place of resurrection at this point. They're leading us to a cliff, and in much of it is our own doing. I'd like to talk to you about the concept of an organizational disability. If you've ever heard of organizational learning, or think of an organization that learns, organizations also have learning disabilities. Things that they can compensate for, but which are traps, which we often fall into, and are some of the traps that we're dealing with in our church today. These learning disabilities are things that we can do something about if we're aware that they exist and we're willing to change our patterns of thinking and our patterns of doing. The first is the parable of the boiling frog, which most of us have heard at one point or another. If you throw the frog into the boiling water, it's going to jump out. But if you put the frog in lukewarm water and keep turning the temperature up 10 degrees at a time, by the time it realizes that the water is boiling, it's fried. That's really what's happening in the church. It's what's been happening to us over the course of the last 40 or 50 years. We're so unaware of our surroundings. We're so, in many ways, feel helpless or don't know what to do about it, that the temperature's being turned up around us and we're close to being in slow cook mode. One of the other issues that we're dealing with as well is the delusion of learning from experience. Everybody thinks that they learn from experience. Most of us would like to think we have. If we've lived long enough, we have certainly amended our ways based on an experience. But most organizations also believe that they learn from experience. If we make a bad decision, we know that the next time we shouldn't do that. It's pretty simple. But the fact of the matter is we don't, and here's why. We very rarely, if ever, have to deal with the consequences of major decisions that we make at an organizational level. We have a learning horizon that's not that far out. It may be as far out as the position we hold or the time in which we're the decision maker. So essentially what's happened is that we are now dealing with decisions that were made 10, 20, and 30 years ago. It's hard for us to have learned from those because the people that made the decisions are no longer in the decision-making capacity. So it's very difficult for an organization to learn. The Episcopal Church is obviously not an exception to this. But there are ways in which we can learn. Think of the decade of evangelism. The decade in which I came of age, the 1990s. This decade of evangelism was, for all intents and purposes, a colossal failure. Is that a bad thing? Is it a bad thing that we named it as the decade of evangelism and it was a failure? I don't think it is, on its face. It didn't work. We tried something sort of, in the way that the Episcopal Church thinks about evangelism. We tried it and it didn't work. That in and of itself is not the bad part. What did we do about it? Was there significant debrief or strategic thinking? I think there was at some level. But it wasn't able to be communicated throughout the whole organization. I think there were good people working on this that did think about it, but there wasn't a way for it to filter down, so we didn't learn from it. So what did we do? Launched 2020. A vision to double the church by 2020. How's that working for us? We've lost 100,000 people average Sunday attendance in the last 10 years. Is it bad that we set out to double the size of the church by 2020, but it's not working? No. What's the problem is we can't think about it strategically, and we're failing to make strategic decisions that filter all the way down through the organization. So we can't learn. We're suffering from this inability to learn from what we've done, and that's what we're trying to do here, is to create a learning community. This is an organic, grassroots way to have a learning community of people bringing ideas together so that we can learn from the great efforts that we try and fail, and from the small efforts that try and succeed, and from the large ones that succeed. In whatever way, we're creating a learning community. It's a way to learn from experience. Final one I want to talk about is the illusion of taking charge. Being proactive is in vogue. Nobody says, I'm the most reactive leader. Everybody wants to talk about how proactive. I'm being proactive. That's wonderful. Encourage proactivity. It's often seen as an antidote to reaction. But often, if you think about it, proactiveness is simply reactiveness in disguise. And the way I see it in the church is often overled and undermanaged. Everybody's a leader. Everybody wants to be a leader. I mean, I'm in a PhD program in organizational leadership. It's not that I'm against leadership. It's a wonderful thing. Who's doing the managing? You know, who's crunching the numbers? We need some more nerds in the church. I mean, we need some planners and some strategic thinkers to do the kind of work so that we're not jumping on the next interesting thing that comes down the line because it seems like it would be proactive, when in reality it's simply reactive. I think of the work that's been done often with the national church budget. And I'll talk some about that. It's entirely, people saying, well, we've got to be proactive, but really the cuts are just not strategic, done by good people who mean well. But again, it can't work in the organization as it's currently structured. It can't be communicated properly. We can't get communication up the organization or down. And so we think we're being proactive when we're really being reactive. So let's stop picking on the church for a minute. Let's pick on another target and look at that to help our own thinking. Just a minute. Let's look at General Motors. What a great target for us. The fact is, we know crisis doesn't usually come upon us right away. It usually sneaks up on us over the course of time, like the boiled frog. Did General Motors find itself in crisis all of a sudden in 2007? Did it all of a sudden wake up and say, oh, we're bankrupt and the government needs to take us over? Did that happen overnight? I'll tell you it didn't. In an interesting case study that Michael Jensen wrote about General Motors, he looked at it over the course of the last 30 years, but particularly over the course of the 80s and 90s. In 1978, General Motors sold 1 in every 2 cars in America. They actually, in the 40s and 50s, had to work to keep their market share under 50% so that they didn't have antitrust lawsuits filed against them. They sold 1 in every 2 cars. By the early 1980s, everybody remembers Japan and the quality movement in Japan. Everybody got scared. If you grew up in the 80s, you got compared to a Japanese student, I'm sure. Because there were things going on in Japan that were really remarkable. People got worried. There were high labor costs at General Motors, huge quality problems, and what they decided on as a strategy was to automate their plants to reduce labor costs. So over the course of the 1980s, they spent $67 billion in research and development and in plant automation. At the end of the 1980s, their market share had dropped from selling 1 in every 2 cars to 1 in every 3 cars. After spending $67 billion, their shareholder equity at the end of the decade was only $26 billion. And they lost market share. They went into the 90s under a different CEO. What did they try to do? The same thing. Tried some different change initiatives that were resisted, but the same thing. By the end of the 1990s, they were selling, now after continuing this strategy, 1 in every 4 cars. What did they do in the 2000s? Hired Rick Wagner from GE, a lieutenant of Jack Welch, to come in and turn it around. Started the same kinds of change initiatives. They were resisted at every level of the organization. Their labor costs went up, their quality costs went down largely, and in 2007, when they were bankrupt and the government took them over, they were selling 1 in every 5 cars. They tried strategies all along. Do you know what Toyota and Honda was worth at the end of the 80s? $26 billion, $21 billion. They could have purchased Toyota and Honda for less money than they spent trying to automate their own plants. Now, it's easy to look in hindsight, but what were they doing? You can look at an organization like this and say, are you kidding me? How in the world does the largest car company in the world do this? Didn't they see this coming? Well, there were people. I was going to say, does anyone know who the most famous board member in 1986? Ross Perot was on the board. He made a presentation that's now been made public that's stunning. He predicted exactly what was going to happen to General Motors. Now, we're not General Motors, thanks be to God. But we can look at this and say, you could look at this and say, that's the most ridiculous story I've ever. How in the world does this happen? Look at the Episcopal Church from 1965 until now. And I will have people actually say to me, things are fine the way they are. But I love going to General Convention. And I do. I'm a kind of a church nerd. I like being around people. But the whole system, the structure, the way that it is broken. It simply is. And we're living in a time when maybe it's not the most fun, it's certainly challenging, but God has called us to this place for a particular time. You are here and having this conversation not by chance, not by accident, but God has called us to this place in this time to preach about hope. But we've got to know where we are and exactly what's going on in our midst. We've got to be able to see it with some sense of clarity. A couple things happen when we get threatened. A lot of research that what happens to organizations when they face a threat and people. There's a concept called learned helplessness that begins to happen. When people feel like things are completely out of their control or they're powerless to change it or they feel like they actually learn to be helpless. We get pessimistic about our ability to help and see transformation happen in the world. We start to doubt the hope that's within us. We start to become helpless. And so what we do is try to do the same thing over and over again and just hope that it changes. And that's not insanity, that's helplessness. We get a rigid response to change. This is very interesting. We fail to alter course when we're threatened, and actually we engage in the same behaviors that worked before. Like General Motors trying to do the same thing. We're going to structure our car business the same way we did in the 40s. They only got rid of their divisions like closing Pontiac and Hummer and all of these kinds of divisions of the company when it went bankrupt, not when they knew it wasn't working. We get rigid. We focus on our patterns from the past. The Penn Central Railroad is one of my favorites. They continued to pay dividends to stockholders till they were bankrupt. Seriously. It's the Saturday Evening Post continued to raise their prices while their circulation was plummeting. There's increased cohesiveness in an organization that feels threatened, and it creates a kind of groupthink. And sometimes we think about groupthink, well, everybody's thinking the same thing. But it's a little more nuanced than that. What happens is we prematurely converge on a course of action. Like we decide we're going to restructure something, or we decide we're going to engage a particular program, and so we converge on it prematurely because we're just hoping that something can happen. We want to be proactive. We're being reactive, and it's rigid. And at the organizational level, this is interesting. We begin to centralize authority. We increase our formalization of authority. Our communication gets less rich in its content and in its format. And what's even most interesting, especially in the church, is the focus becomes cuts, cutting, slicing away, rather than cutting and trimming back in order to grow and develop into something new. Example, the 2009 General Convention budget, I think, is the best example of that. The threat was so real that the response was very rigid. And it's really about our structures and not having structures that allow it to happen. And what we're talking about doing is creating structures, both human and ones that we build from material like our buildings, and creating structures that serve our mission rather than something that has nothing to do with our mission. A sense of what was and a sense of what could have been. I want to share with you the research of Lovett Weems. Is anyone familiar with his research on the church? He looks at he's a United Methodist from the Lewis Center of Leadership at Wesley Theological Seminary. Was looking at the Methodist Church from a statistical point of view. He's kind of your statistics guy. What he began to look at was the death rate in the United States. And if you look at the death rate, it's primarily flat, and it has been since about 2003. But you can see since about the end of the Second World War, it's been largely stable with a few dips here and there. The population of the United States has remained stable. Lovett Weems has coined a term that I think is powerful. We've had over the past decade or so, a number of natural disasters around the world that include tsunamis. And we all know the kind of weather that brings on a tsunami, the kind of devastation that it brings in its wake. And what Lovett Weems claims is that the church, the mainline church, are going to face a death tsunami. Look at the death rate from this point of view. Here's our flat portion from 2003. This flat portion runs until 2019, when you see that this runs all the way up to 2050, the year I will be 70 years old. Straight up. It's predicted that between 2019 and 2050, there will be more deaths and a higher death rate than at any time since the 1940s, when medical advances such as antibiotics were introduced. The total number of deaths is predicted to go up every year until 2050. It is predicted that there will be 50% more deaths in 2050 than in 2010. 50% more. The majority of these deaths will be older, non-Hispanic whites and African Americans, the two largest racial groups in the church. This is staggering. If you think about the average age of the people in your congregation and sitting in your pews, we can see it on the way. We can see it on the way. We are aware of our situation. You're sitting here because you know the temperature of the water. Also because you have a hope that is within you that's been placed there by your baptism, by the fact that you were created in the image of God. that you have been transformed by Jesus Christ, and that, brothers and sisters, we have the only product that has a 100% guarantee. But we can't sell it. And it's not going to go away. The idea that less people are going to pay more money, not going to work anymore. We have a broken delivery system largely, and buildings that don't serve our mission. The problem won't go away. It can't be solved. But it's a dilemma that can be flipped to our advantage. It's a way, we have something in which this dilemma that we can live with. But we're here to figure out and to seek God's advice and wisdom and counsel and discernment about how we can flip that dilemma. And this is how strongly I feel about this. I really believe that our church can lead the way. I'm not the only one that thinks that. But there is this idea going around that there's something big happening in the culture, which I think is true. I mean, we're living in something big that we can't quite get our hands around. There's this idea going around that what's going to happen to the Episcopal Church, and we just have to figure out how to live with it, is that we're going to decline into some small boutique church, that we've got to settle for small congregations and communities, that what we have isn't going to sell to the culture the way that it did, that Jesus Christ isn't going to be able to offer the same kind of transformation. In some way, that's what we're saying. But there's this idea that we've got to live smaller, and that it's just going to get smaller, and it's not really going to get any better. And this is what I think about that. And I mean this. I believe that is a lie straight from the pit of hell. I do believe that is a lie. There is no way that the gospel imperative is to take the gospel to the ends of the earth, to baptize all nations. I don't mean being some kind of imperialist. I mean sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ with people. There is no way that that's the truth. And we know that by the power of the resurrection. And so I'm calling and challenging you this day to know what we're about as a church, to get engaged with it in a new way, to stand up and say, we're going to go in a different direction, that the changes are going to go at the next exit. Like, we're not going down this road anymore. We're getting off the road. You can stay on the road. We're getting off the road. Because change is off at this exit, and the gospel is going to lead us down some bumpy roads and we're going to do some off-roading for a while. But we're going to figure this out. God's going to give us a vision. This church is going to grow, and it's going to change, and we're going to have to give up some of the things that we love. You know why? Because it's not about us. That's the big news flash. I have to tell myself that. You know, it's not about you. It's about the people that God is calling us to reach. It's about the gospel. It's about the message. And it's about your place in that, whatever it is. Whether you think you have the gifts or not, God has promised us that all the gifts are present in the body. I thank you for your time. I thank you for your thinking. And I leave you with the Easter acclamation, Alleluia, Christ is risen.
The Lord is risen indeed. Alleluia.
Thank you for your time.